As Jessica mentioned, I'm Jessy Ceha, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And this work was done in collaboration with INRI at Bordeaux in France. And what we looked at in what I'm presenting here is the expression of curiosity in social robots. So to start, I want to talk about why we're interested in curiosity. So curiosity is this intrinsic desire to explore or obtain unknown information. And previous research has found that it enhances learning, information-seeking behavior, and improves memory retention. So understanding how to elicit and maintain curiosity, for example, in students, can help us design educational technologies. And so recent research has begun to explore whether educational technologies like robots can foster curiosity in students. So some previous research has started to look at this. One study had a robot encourage elementary school children to ask questions and see whether that elicited more curiosity. And another study implemented a curious personality in the agents themselves. And so this is something actually we wanted to do as well. And we're interested in how is the expression of curiosity perceived in a social robot? Or how is the expression of curiosity in a social robot perceived? Can it affect the emotional feeling as well as the behavioral expression of curiosity in students? And how does it impact learning? So to do this, we created a structured turn-taking game called LinkIt, which was designed to teach players how to categorize rocks. And then we focused on one curiosity-driven behavior, specifically on-task question asking, to convey the robot's curiosity about the learning task, about the rocks in this case. So we had 3 experimental conditions: neutral, curious, and curious plus reveal. So the neutral robot was not curious. The curious robot was curious. And in the curious plus reveal condition, we had a robot that was curious but also revealed why it was curious. And we added this condition because we wanted to know whether an improved understanding of the robot's internal state might have additional effects on participants. So the robot speech we carefully designed to convey the same informational content about rocks in all 3 conditions. And we used Wizard of Oz for the robot, so we were able to quickly and easily select from a predetermined set of statements and questions for the robot. So here's one example of how we changed the content or the way in which the robot gave the content about the rocks to the participants. So, for example, the neutral robot would have said some rocks have a really glassy surface. They probably cooled too quickly to form any crystals. Whereas the curious robot would have said, I'm curious why some rocks have a glassy surface. Could they have cooled too quickly to form any crystals? And the revealing robot would have added why they were curious. So, a glassy surface is new to me. I'm curious why some rocks have that. Could they have cooled too quickly to form any crystals? So I have a very short video just showing you how the robot was interacting with students during the game. Just check this.
I choose rock. B.
You are correct. You linked them.
Link them.
Woohoo.
I would have expected it to look different. I am curious though, do the hose port with gas bubbles get trapped when the lava cools? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I think that sounds like it could be true.
Okay, so our methodology, we ran 30 participants, and we used a between subjects design. So each participant interacted with only one robot personality. And each participant came in for 2 sessions, session 1 and session 2 a week later. And that was mainly to measure their retention of any of the learned material, if they learned anything, and curiosity. So as I mentioned before, we were interested in 4 main things: perception, emotional and behavioral curiosity, and learning. And we used a number of different methods to measure each, such as questionnaires, quizzes, and interviews in both session 1 and session 2. But we also coded verbal behavior. We also allowed participants to ask for fun facts about rocks, to understand what rocks they were interested in and how many. and a free period. So the free period was 5 to 10 minutes in which participants could freely choose how to interact with the robot. And it allowed us to apply a procedure we came up with for assessing curiosity through behavior in what we called a free choice curiosity test. And what we wanted to do with this is to figure out whether a participant's curiosity was about the rocks, about the robot, both, neither, or something else. So to do this, we gave participants 8 rocks, and 4 of them had a ground truth card. So it had information about the rock, such as its features, what type it was, the name. And then participants were told, like I said, they were free to do what they wanted to do with the rocks, with the robot, and that the researcher was going to step out for 10 minutes. So by giving participants these 8 rocks, 4 for which they had information and 4 for which they didn't, we constructed this measure of curiosity. So if participants decided to ask the robot about any of the rocks for which they had information, for which they had the ground truth, it suggested that the participant was more curious about testing the robot's knowledge than gathering more information about the rocks. Whereas if they chose to ask the robot about the rocks for which they didn't have information, it indicated more curiosity for the rocks. So moving on to results. As you can imagine, we collected a large amount of data, but I'll only be covering some of the results in this presentation. So I encourage you to read the paper to see the rest and the discussion. So starting with perception. In the interview, we asked participants to rate on a 7-point Likert scale how curious they thought the robot that they interacted with was, from 1, not curious at all, to 7, extremely curious. And so here we're looking at the average rating for each condition. And participants in the 2 curious conditions perceived their robots to be significantly more curious than participants who interacted with the neutral robot. So this indicates that our design did, in fact, create a robot that behaved in a manner considered curious by participants. And the majority of participants in the 2 curious conditions said that it was specifically the on-task question asking that indicated to them that the robot was curious. And actually, in the neutral condition, participants said that the lack of question asking was the reason why they felt the robot was not curious. In addition, some participants in the neutral condition felt that even though the robot wasn't asking questions, it was curious. So when we asked why, they said for reasons such as, oh, he knows a lot about rocks, or he's very interested in playing the game, as well as some nonverbal cues, such as the robot tilts his head. So these were also reasons why participants felt the robot was curious when there was no question asking. So we also looked at emotional curiosity. And we wanted to know whether participants' emotional curiosity, how they rated their own curiosity about rocks, changed over the course of the study. So again, we used a 7-point Likert scale to ask participants to rate their own curiosity about rocks. And we asked before interaction with the robot, after, and 1 week later when they came in for session 2. So this table is showing the change of the average rating per condition. So how much it changed at each time point. And compared to the other conditions, participants in the curious condition experienced a significantly greater change in their curiosity from pre-interaction to post-interaction, but also when they came in 1 week later. Moving on to behavior. So analysis of the free choice curiosity test didn't show significant differences in how participants chose to present rocks to the robot. However, in addition to just analyzing their behavior, we also asked them to explain what they did in the free period and why. And we found that only participants in the curious conditions described that their behavior was only about rocks, only wanting to know more information about rocks. Whereas all the participants in the neutral condition stated that their behavior was either directed towards just the robot or both the rocks and the robot. Here's an example of how One person described their behavior of how they use the rocks with the information, the cards. So I kind of tested the robot. I specifically used the rocks with the cards to see if he could correctly, precisely identify features. As I mentioned, we also looked at verbal behavior during the game, which was coded using the theoretical framework of curiosity. So we coded these 10 curiosity-driven verbal behaviors. And this table shows the average number of participant responses by type and how they differed by condition. And the statistically significant response types are in bold. So we found that participants in the curious conditions produced a greater number of responses in the game that can be categorized as expressing curiosity compared to the neutral condition. And in particular, there was more curiosity, more question asking, and specifically on-task question asking in the curious and curious plus reveal compared to the neutral condition. And there was a significant increase in on-task question asking in the curious condition. So lastly, we looked at learning. And similar to prior work, we actually found that condition had no effect on quiz scores, nor did it have an effect 1 week later when we tested for retention. However, we did find that participants who reported being more curious about rocks after the game had significantly higher quiz scores a week later. So to summarize, what did we learn? For perception, participants in the 2 curious conditions perceived their robots to be significantly more curious than participants who interacted with the neutral robot. And we also found that the robot's expression of curiosity increased the participants' own emotional feeling and behavioral expression of curiosity about rocks. Participants in the curious condition reported a significantly greater increase in curiosity about rocks after interaction. And for behavior, using that theoretical framework of curiosity to code the dialogue, we found a significant increase in on-task question asking by participants in the curious condition, and a greater number of responses that can be categorized as expressing curiosity in both curious conditions. And results from the free choice curiosity test indicated that both curious robots were more effective at directing participants' curiosity towards the rocks than the neutral robot. And lastly, although we found that the condition had no effect on learning, participants who reported being more curious about rocks after interaction had significantly higher quiz scores a week later. So in conclusion, with this work, we contributed a structured game for the study of human-robot interaction and a new procedure for assessing curiosity through behavior. And we contribute to the understanding of expressing curiosity in social robots and the effects of social curiosity transfer along the dimensions of perception, curiosity, and learning. Thank you. And any questions?
Are there any questions on the floor?
This is really great work. But I have a question. Wouldn't it, in this particular context, would it also be accurate to change the word robot to the word puppet?
Yes. But this could be automated. The game, the interaction that the participants were having with the robot. And so we did also, I didn't mention it, but we looked at a lot of, we had questionnaires to look at also their perception of the robot as a robot, not just a puppet, and taking into consideration its look, humanoid type robot, how that affected perception. So I think we are looking at a robot in this case, yeah,
okay,
rather than just a puppet.
Okay, thank you.
Hiya. My question is, did the participants trust the setting of this whole game? A lot of research in other scenario-based studies where robots were used indicate that participants are well aware that there are no stakes in the game, that the robot was programmed to say and do certain things. So I question whether people were truly more curious, or were they just going along with the scenario that you have set up for them?
Great question. So we did look at these things, and also surprisingly, when I asked if they had any idea that we used Wizard of Oz or anything like that, no one had any idea. They truly believed they were interacting with a fully autonomous robot playing the game. Also, it might have helped that they were alone in the room with the robot playing the game. There was no researcher, nobody there, so I think they felt maybe more free to interact with the robot and develop feelings for it, because also in pilot studies, we found that if we had a researcher there, the participants would often look at the researcher maybe to see how to feel about the situation. Yes, and we did. I think we also asked questions about trust, also trusting in the robot. It was all positive, so yeah.
Any more questions from the floor?